In this video, we will translate sentences that contain concepts from chapters 1 through 7 of Learn to Read New Testament Greek. The following sentences have been taken from the accompanying workbook for Learn to Read New Testament Greek. As we've learned in class, first things that we want to do when we come to a Greek sentence is identify the subject. We'll do that with an underline. The verb, we'll do that by circling it. The direct object by squaring it. The indirect object by double underlining. And any prepositional phrase or modifiers by using brackets. Now let's take a look at this first sentence. We have elabis, tadora, apa, ton, mikron, teknon. What is the subject of this sentence? Well, the first thing that we have to look at is ta, dora. This is a potential subject. Notice that it is in the neuter gender. It is plural, and the ta or the a ending can either be nominative or accusative. But just in case, let's take a look at our verb and make sure that it agrees in number and in person. So we have elabis. Our S ending is where we need to look for the person number suffix. And if we go through our paradigm for the secondary active endings, if you will recall, they are on, S, in, amen, ete, on. So if you heard that there, S falls into the second singular, which means that tadora would not be in agreement with the verb. In order to be in agreement, it would have to be a singular, or in this case it is neuter, so it could still be plural, but it'd have to be in the third person for the verb. So it seems as if we have an implied subject, you, the second person singular, you, within the verb, so far as S is concerned. Sorry, I can't get that highlighted. So instead of underlining a subject, we will just address the verb. So we go ahead and circle the verb we have here, which is elabis. And then we'll move to identify our direct object. Now when we were looking at tadora, we noticed that it could have been either the accusative or the nominative. We eliminated the nominative as an option because it did not agree in person and number with our verb elabis. So it's going to be our accusative. If you will recall, the accusative is most likely the direct object, and in this case it is. So let's go ahead and put a square around tadora. The last thing we need to do for this sentence is identify any sort of prepositions, prepositional phrases, or modifiers that might modify or further explain either our subject, our direct object, or our indirect object. And here it seems as if we have one, apa, ton, mikron, teknon, which is modifying ta, dora. So let's go ahead and put a couple of brackets around the entire phrase. There we go. Now let's go ahead and start work on translation. Here we have elabis. It's the first thing we need to translate because of the fact that it contains both our subject and our verb. And before we do that, we need to identify what tense, voice, and mood it is. We can eliminate the voice and the mood because all we have learned so far is the middle for the voice, the active for the voice, and indicative for the mood. So the verbs that we have learned up to this point have been present, future, imperfect, and the aorist. Before we classify that, let's take a look at elabis. What verb is it from? If you will recall, elabis is from the verb lambano. Notice that instead of having lamban as your stem here, we just have lab as the stem. So it seems as if the stem has undergone a rather large change, which we know is characteristic of the second aorist. That's further confirmed by the fact that we have an augment here, the past time morpheme. So this will be rendered into English in the past time. So we can go ahead and translate as you take or receive. Now we're going to need to modify that just a little bit, because if you look down at the end of the clause, we have a semicolon, which is in Greek your question mark. So instead of you take or receive as a statement of fact, we're going to need to put this into the interrogative or make it a question. Do you take or receive? What might you take or receive? Well, we need our direct object, which defines for us what is being taken or received, and they are ta, do, ra, the gifts. Do you take or receive the gifts? And now we have our prepositional phrase, apaton, mikron, teknon, that is further modifying ta, do, ra. Do you take the gifts from? Before we finish off the translation, ton, mikron, teknon, notice that we have an adjectival relationship here. We have mikron, which is an adjective, little or small, and teknon, which is a noun, children. So little or small is modifying children in some way. If you recall from class, we have three different ways to translate adjectival relationships. We have the predicate relationship, the children are little, the substantive, which won't be this one because of the fact that we have both an adjective and a noun, and we also have the attributive adjective, which would be something along the lines of the little children. The way that we know that this is the little children as opposed to the children are little is the fact that the definite article, tone, is with the adjective mikron. So, putting this all together, do you take or receive the gifts from the little children? Next, we have the sentence Eblepsin tas iskouros in te synagoge aledidaxon heteron euangelion. Now let's do the same thing that we did for the last sentence. But in this sentence we need to notice, and I've already done some of the work for you, that there are two clauses. We know that by the fact that Allah here, which means but, separates the two clauses, and that fact is further confirmed by the presence of two separate verbs. Now let's ease the burden of translating a larger sentence by only addressing one clause at a time. So first we will address eblepsin tas iskouros in te synagoge. Let's find the subject. Do we have an external subject in this sentence? Well, tas iskouros is not a possibility. It doesn't have a nominative. And in te synagoge is governed by this head preposition, so it's a prepositional phrase, in te synagoge. So it seems as if all we have here is eblepsin, which is a verb. Our subject will be a part of that verb. It will be the internal subject, as we've been calling it. Now let's identify the direct object. Tas iskouros can be either a genitive or it can be a accusative, plural, genitive singular or accusative plural. In this case, it is the accusative plural, It is our direct object. And then we need to identify the prepositional phrase or any modifiers. And as I said at the beginning here, we have in, the preposition in, that is governing te synagoge. In is in agreement with the dative case of synagoge. That is to say that in takes the dative. So here is our prepositional phrase. Now let's go ahead and translate what we have so far, and then we'll go and we'll address the next clause. So ablepsin is from the verb blepo. We already know that since we've only had the active voice in indicative mood, that it's going to be active and indicative. What is the tense? Is it present, future, imperfect, or aorist? Well, let's take it apart. First, it's from blepo. The first letter we see here is an addition. It's an epsilon, or the augment. And that means that we can eliminate the present and the future as options for our tense. We still have the imperfect and the aorist as options. So let's see if we can find anything else in this verb to clarify it for us. We have ebleps. Okay, so C is not a natural part of the stem of blepo. P is. So it seems as if the P has combined with a specific letter to form C through the process called amalgamation. P plus sigma is a psi. So we have the sigma of the aorist. You might be wondering why we don't have an alpha here, because we just say aorist. But this is the third singular, which is the only form that does not take the alpha as a connecting vowel within the aorist, first aorist tense. So now we have aorist as our tense. It's an aorist active indicative. So if we go ahead and translate that out, now we have he or she saw. What did he or she see? He or she saw tasis. Tasis, it's from iskuras with an omicron sigma. It is an adjective, and it is not modifying any particular noun here. If you will recall, we had the attributive adjective, the predicate adjective, and the substantive, which sort of makes a noun out of an adjective. Well, there is no noun to be modified, so iskuras is going to be a substantive adjective. Notice also that instead of being the default gender of your adjective, which would be the masculine, it has been placed into the feminine gender. Notice that with the alpha sigma ending, which is characteristic of the pure alpha endings of the first declension. So we can say he or she saw the strong women, and then finishing off the clause, inte synagoge, in the synagogue. Now we come down to our clause here, and we can go ahead and start the translation by just saying but, because we know that it's contrastive with the contrastive use of Allah, the conjunction. Then we need to do the same thing that we did above, which is identify our subject, verb, direct object, indirect object, and modifiers. So let's look for our subject. We see that there is heteron euangelion as a possibility. An on ending could be your neuter, singular, nominative. It could be, but euangelion well, it most certainly could be. Euangelion is a neuter, a noun. But it could also be our accusative ending. So we need to take a look at our verb to find out if it agrees in person and number. We have our ending here, which tells us the person and number of the verb. Son, if you'll go back through your endings, we have on, s, n, amen, eta, on, or son for the third plural. So this is a third plural verb, and it tells us that the singular of heteron euangelion is not, in fact, in agreement with the verb. So we probably have an internal subject as opposed to an external subject. So we don't need to underline anything. We can just go ahead and take the circle for the verb and circle edidaxon. Now we find our direct object, and we've already said that this could have been a nominative or an accusative. And in this instance, it is the accusative. So we can go ahead and take our direct object, square, and square up the noun euangelion. And you could do this in one of two different ways. If you want to go ahead and mark off the fact that heteron is a modifier of euangelion, it's not a part of the proper noun, it is a modifier of it, and we can put the brackets across heteron. But you could also, if you wanted to, extend out this direct object to signify that it is all to be viewed together. But grammatically speaking, euangelion is your direct object, whereas heteron is modifying euangelion in an attributive adjective relationship. Now, before we continue to translate, we need to find out what kind of verb edidaxon is. Is it a present? Is it a future? Is it an imperfect? Or is it an aorist? Well, it's from Didasco. We found that the first thing which is not right, so to speak, is that we have an addition of the epsilon augment right here. And we also find that the kappa from the root didak has been transferred or amalgamated into a xi. So a kappa plus a sigma is going to form a xi, and that tells us that the epsilon plus the sigma, and as it happens, the alpha connecting vowel, means that this is an aorist verb. So if we were to translate, but they taught, and then here's our attributive adjective relationship, heteron euangelion, they taught a different gospel.